guys was working for the fire department, and he was in charge of the safety portion for over a period of 10 years of a well-known fire department. And this guy should not be scared of walking up a darkened gravel road with me. We thought we heard something in the woods. We approached it, and he stopped on a dime. He looked down the road and says, "I can't go any farther. If I do, I'm going to cry." And so I'd heard these stories before, but I'd never witnessed it, right in front of me. And so
now, do you think something was pushing him to keep him from going farther, or do you think he actually convinced himself that if he went any farther, something bad's going to happen or something?
well, he was unfamiliar with the subject matter. He really went up there as kind of a lark. It was the second trip he'd taken with me out in the woods looking for the issue, and he didn't know all the layered details. So for him to say that was really interesting. And so I kind of mentioned to him what could be happening, and he says, "I'm going to cry." And I said, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, if I take another step," and his voice is shaking. And he did a 180 and started to run down the mountain with his head tucked in his shoulders, especially with the right shoulder up higher, because it turns out that he saw something as he was going down the mountain, looking at him from the woods. And he grabbed his coworker who was up there with him by the scruff of his neck, and they both ran down to their car for no reason. And so that story gets way more interesting as the night went on, and we ended up walking through this invisible energy field that seemed to have a very specific entry point and exit point where you could feel the compression of energy slow you down. And I call it the wall of jello that we walked through, and we walked out of, just picture like a sheet of water, and the same kind of ability to walk underwater where you're very limited by the resistance of water was what we felt. It wasn't scary for us for whatever reason, but it got scary much later on for one of the individuals that was up there, and we ended up almost having to carry him out for no reason.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I got to ask you a question. You mentioned that you saw a mole, like it cut in half, basically, when you were up on that one side of the mountain. Now, was that before this or after this?
Oh, that's a good question. The timeline is right around the same time. I'm going to say that this was probably after that.
Then you're braver than I am. Okay. Seriously, if I was out there alone and all of a sudden something was, cut in half and gushing blood out yet and just died, okay, when you're the only one right there, that would tell me right there that, hey, if they can take a mole and do that to a mole, I mean, what could if they felt threatened with one of you guys,
I know.
Maybe psychological, one of those guys that when they were getting scared and decided to call it quits one by one, maybe they were getting some kind of something like telling them, like, hey, if you go any farther, you might not come back.
Well, and they were armed. That's the interesting point of this, is everybody that ran down that mountain, we didn't figure this out, but they had some kind of arm with them. They either had a pistol, a rifle, or something. And all I had was a Red Bull in my hand and a backpack.
So, about the same as me. But, going back even to Art Bell's show, where he supposedly had some guys who were out, shooting stuff they didn't supposed to out in the forest, and they supposedly ran across a Bigfoot, and they supposedly shot it and killed it and buried it, that whole thing.
Justin Smahy, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, where they actually killed that and its mate and then and buried it. But, they talked about how many times they had to shoot it. And that kind of stands, to a point where I believe that point, because my uncle, when I was a little kid, was up by Mount Shasta. He liked going hunting. And he actually, shot a bear. And his first shot, didn't kill it. So the bear kept on coming. And I think he shot again. I don't know, the whole story, but I was a little kid. But all I know, he was in the hospital for well over a month, and he had major scars all over his body where the bear mauled him, till it died. And he was lucky that the bear died from the gunshot, or my uncle would have been dead. I mean, it's so if you guys, if you're out there and you run across a Bigfoot, you got a 38 or you got a 380 or a 45, if you think it's going to drop something that weighs about 800 pounds and it's going to drop them, you know what? I would drop the gun and show that, hey, I know threat. There's my gun. Dropped it. Let it know it, because that gun isn't going to do you any good.
No, and they're not alone. I mean, very rarely do you hear reports of people that have a prolonged encounter with one, that they're alone. And so you have to take that into consideration, the fact that your gun, first of all, generally doesn't do anything. Most people don't take shots. They take shots at things that they can't see in the woods, but, right. We've heard all the stories about them looking through their rifle scope and saying, I couldn't shoot it for whatever reason. But, I just think that they're hardly ever alone, and that, shooting at one of these things, unless you feel like your family's life is in danger, your instincts kick in, you got to do something. But I don't think that they're just flesh and blood. So the idea of, bullets doing something to them almost strikes me as laughable, because of all these other strange connective tissue, paranormal things that are happening with them.
Well, yeah, especially like, Ron said, just all the weird noises. I mean, not just like the car door issue, or, like hearing a horn from a car, or some weird, or people talking when there is no people around, it could sound like, in the background, people talking. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it has to be something so much more out there with them that, I don't know if they like playing mind games with us humans, but, again, if somebody walked in my backyard, I'm not going to be very happy.
No, you're not going to be very happy. Maybe they look at it as their living room and not their backyard. If this is their nursery or their den, you're even more upset, especially if nighttime is basically noontime to them, and we're out there roaming around, during their prime hours, looking for them in camouflage and whatnot. I mean, it just must be so laughable, first of all. And I think that's, where a lot of the trickery comes in, because most of the things, as far as intimidation factors that work with these researchers, are very minute things that scare the pants out of them, including talking. It's a very minute tactic. Throwing pebbles, very minute, showing a flash of light. These things all scare people out of the woods. And I don't think it should. This is some form of communication with the other. And, we can get into maybe what that is. I try to, speak about this as honestly as I can without speculating. Really, all I'm giving you tonight is what I've heard and my own experiences along the way. I try not to put too much conjecture into all these things, but, when I put the Strange-brau together in Cottage Grove at the Axe and Fiddle, it was an idea to, again, start working with long-term witnesses or witnesses that were processing the paranormal, and have them, they can have this place, this outlet once a month to do this, and open the dialogue away from Sasquatch into the other things like portals or UFOs or the little people.
Yeah, well, I hate to say it, some of that stuff even connects with the Bigfoot. Like orbs, for example. Some of the people who claim they saw Bigfoot also saw orbs, and there's this weird things. And the portals, maybe that whatever they are, they're going through time or different dimensions, or maybe they're even tied in with aliens. I have no idea. But I will go on one more little story, and then we go back with with you. I had a guest on which one of his friends worked for a power company, where they go out and check the transmission towers way out in the middle of, wherever it is, mountainsides, woods, you name it.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And they were out checking. And the story goes that, they came down to a river where they had to cross the river to keep going on, so they had to park the truck. And they got out and they got down by the river, and the one guy noticed a Bigfoot. And that Bigfoot, I guess, noticed him and screamed. First thing he did, he didn't supposed to have a weapon with him, but he had a weapon and he discharged it. Then things started getting bad where I guess the Bigfoot supposedly started chasing after him. His friend took off and just left him, and took off with the truck and just left his friend there. And, I guess the Bigfoot was chasing the one guy, and the story, it ended, if his friend, kind of basically got lost coming, through the brush and happened to drive by his other friend, and, he got in and they managed to get away. But that was one of the stories I heard, and it came from a very credible person. So,
right, yeah, no, you're right on the money with that, and I've heard these things over the last 11 years, time and time again. It's just how much you're willing to talk about the stranger things at the end of the day, and so it's nice to have a venue to finally be able to do that and have a long format of 3 hours, right now at least once a month, from 2 to 5 for people to see that live streaming and to interact with.
Okay, now why don't you tell everybody how they can see it and how they can connect with you?
Yeah, so if anybody's ever interested in being a part of Strange Brow, all they have to do is log on to the YouTube channel, where there'll be either a live feed or a recorded feed, or Facebook under the name Strange Brow, B-R-A-U, which is the German iteration for brew. And so we do it in a pub-like setting in Cottage Grove, Oregon. You can go to strangebrow.com and learn more about it. And we have people that Skype in or come there that feel comfortable enough to talk about it in front of a crowd, with a pint in their hand and some good food on the table. And last month we had Alyssa from Spots of the Fawn, and that's a book that deals with these energy sources around the world where portholes supposedly exist. Portals, not portholes. And Kirk Sigurdsson, who's a Portland native and a professor of creative writing at Portland Community College, who wrote a Bigfoot book called Cultus. And Kurt was extremely brave to play his hypnotic regression, where he was out Sasquatching and had a traumatic experience of what he calls the men in plaid, which were these two individuals that approached his car in a sedan and basically, I guess, shine this amazing light in his face. And he had missing time after this approach by these two men. There was a Sasquatch that was also involved in the story, but he had this hypnotic regression, which was recorded over a period of like an hour and a half. And he wanted to deal with the latent memory of this traumatic issue and played for this crowd 10 or 12 minutes of this hypnotic regression, where he was learning that this was some kind of possible screen memory of an alien abduction that unfolded while he was out Bigfooting. And it was a very powerful thing to put on YouTube. I was, pleased that Kirk allowed us to do that. But if you go on Strange Brow and watch Kirk's presentation, you'll be able to see this amazing, event unfold for people. So it gets, I want to have a playful environment to a degree and not take the subject matter too seriously, because, I like to have a good time. And but you can't always do that. I mean, this is a very tough issue for people to deal with a lot of times. And, this is kind of the environment which I hope that people feel comfortable enough to kind of have both sides of the coin showed.
Well, you find there's people that either believe it or they disbelieve it, or I guess you run some people that are neutral on it. Have you ever seen and got any real evidence of anything that, like footprints or anything that